It's been 3 years since the financial crisis crippled the American economy, and much to the consternation of the general public and the demonstrators on Wall Street, there's not been a single prosecution of a high-ranking Wall Street executive or major financial firm, even though fraud and financial misrepresentations played a significant role in the meltdown. We wanted to know why, so 9 months ago, we began looking for cases that might have prosecutorial merit. Tonight, you'll hear about 2 of them. We begin with a woman named Eileen Foster, a senior executive at Countrywide Financial, one of the epicenters of the crisis.
The story will continue in a moment.
Do you believe that there are people at Countrywide who belong behind bars?
Yes.
Do you want to give me their names?
No.
Would you give their names to a grand jury if you were asked?
Yes.
But Eileen Foster has never been asked and never spoken to the Justice Department, even though she was Countrywide's executive vice president in charge of fraud investigations. At the height of the housing bubble, Countrywide Financial was the largest mortgage lender in the country, and the loans it made were among the worst, a third ending up in foreclosure or default, many because of mortgage fraud. It was Foster's job to monitor and investigate allegations of fraud against Countrywide employees and make sure they were reported to the board of directors and the Treasury Department. How much fraud was there at Countrywide?
From what I saw, the types of things I saw, it appeared systemic. It wasn't just one individual or 2 or 3 individuals. It was branches of individuals. It was regions of individuals.
What you seemed to be saying was it was just a way of doing business.
Yes.
In 2007, Foster sent a team to the Boston area to search several branch offices of Countrywide's subprime division, the division that lent to borrowers with poor credit. The investigators rummaged through the office's recycling bins and found evidence that Countrywide loan officers were forging and manipulating borrowers' income and asset statements to help them get loans they weren't qualified for and couldn't afford.
All of the recycle bins, whenever we looked through those, they were full of, signatures that had been cut off of one document and put onto another and then photocopied, or faxed, and then the creation thrown in the recycle bin.
And the incentive for the people at Countrywide to do that was what?
The loan officers received bonuses, commissions. They were compensated regardless of the quality of the loan. There was no incentive for quality. The incentive was to fund the loan, and that's going to drive that type of behavior.
They were committing a crime.
Yes.
After Foster's investigation, Countrywide closed 6 of its 8 branches in the Boston region, and 44 out of 60 employees were fired or quit. Do you think that this was just the Boston office?
No, I know it wasn't just the Boston office. What was going on in Boston was also going on in Chicago and Miami and Detroit and Las Vegas and, Phoenix and in all of the big markets all over Florida.
After the Boston investigation, Foster says Countrywide's subprime division began systematically concealing evidence of fraud from her in violation of company policy and Countrywide's internal financial control system. Someone high up in the top levels of management, she won't say who, told employees to circumvent her office and instead report suspicious activity to the personnel department, which Foster says routinely punished other whistleblowers and protected Countrywide's highest-earning loan officers.
I came to find out that there was many reports of fraud, as I had suspected, and those were never reported through my group, never reported to the board, never reported to the government while I was there.
And you believe this was intentional?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Foster, with the support of her boss, took the information up the corporate chain of command and to the audit department, which confirmed many of her suspicions, but no action was taken. In late 2008, with Countrywide sinking under the weight of its bad loans, it merged with Bank of America. Foster was promoted, and not long afterwards was asked to speak with government regulators to discuss Countrywide's fraud reports. But she was fired before the meeting could take place. What would you have told him?
would have told them exactly what I've told you.
Did you have any discussions with anybody at Countrywide or Bank of America about what you should say to the federal regulators when they came?
I got a call from an individual who, suggested how I should handle the questions that would be coming from the regulators. Made some suggestions that downplayed the severity of the situation.
They wanted you to spin it, and you said you wouldn't. And the next day you were terminated. I mean, it seems like somebody at Countrywide or Bank of America did not want you to talk to federal regulators.
No, that was part of it. No, they absolutely did not.
Do you feel like you were a victim of criminal activity?
It's a crime to retaliate against someone for making reports of mail fraud, bank fraud, wire fraud, mortgage fraud, things that would harm stockholders and investors. And that's what I did, and that's why I was terminated.
Were you offered a settlement?
They asked me to sign a 14-page document that basically would buy my silence in exchange for a large amount of money.
But you didn't sign it.
No.
Why not?
How many people can they buy off? They just pay for it, they commit the crime, and they buy their way out of it and just do it over and over and over again. I wanted them to have some sleepless nights thinking about what they would say to a federal investigator and worry about being exposed and being held accountable for committing a crime.
Eileen Foster spent 3 years trying to clear her name. This fall, she finally won a federal whistleblower complaint against Bank of America for wrongful termination and was awarded nearly $1 million in back pay and benefits. All of this raises several questions. Why has the Justice Department failed to go after mortgage fraud inside Countrywide? There's not been a single prosecution. Even more puzzling is the Justice Department's reluctance to employ one of its most powerful legal weapons against Countrywide's top executives. It's called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. It was overwhelmingly passed by Congress and signed by President Bush following the last big round of corporate scandals involving Enron, Tyco, and WorldCom. It was supposed to restore confidence in American corporations and financial markets. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act imposed strict rules for corporate governance, requiring chief executive officers and chief financial officers to certify under oath that their financial statements are accurate and that they have established an effective set of internal controls to ensure that all relevant information reaches investors. Knowingly signing a false statement is a criminal offense punishable with up to 5 years in prison. Frank Partnoy is a highly regarded securities lawyer, a professor at the University of San Diego Law School, and an expert on Sarbanes-Oxley.
The idea was to have a criminal statute in place that would make CEOs and CFOs think twice, think 3 times before they sign their names attesting to the accuracy of financial statements or the viability of internal controls.
And this law has not been used at all in the financial crisis.
It hasn't been used to go after Wall Street. It hasn't been used for these kinds of cases at all.
Why not?
I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that question. I hope that it will be used. I think there clearly are instances where CEOs and CFOs signed financial statements that said there were adequate controls and there weren't adequate controls. But I can't explain why it hasn't been used yet.
We told Partnoy about Eileen Foster's allegations of widespread mortgage fraud at Countrywide and efforts to prevent the information from reaching her, the federal government, and the board of directors in violation of the company's internal controls. I mean, that's a deliberate circumvention, right?
Certainly sounds like it, and it certainly sounds like a good place to start a criminal investigation. Usually when the federal government hears about facts like this, they would start an investigation and they would try to move up the organization to try to figure out whether this information got up to senior officers and why it wasn't disclosed to the public.
In fact, according to a civil suit filed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, Countrywide's chief executive officer, Angelo Mazzillo, knew as early as 2006 that a significant percentage of its subprime borrowers were engaged in mortgage fraud, and that it hid this and other negative information about the quality of its loans from investors. When the case was settled out of court a year ago, October, the SEC's Director of Enforcement, Robert Khuzami, called Mozilla a corporate executive who deliberately disregarded his duty to investors by concealing what he saw from inside the executive suite. A looming disaster in which Countrywide was buckling under the weight of increasing risky mortgage underwriting, mounting defaults and delinquencies, and a deteriorating business model. Mazzillo, who admitted no wrongdoing, accepted a lifetime ban from ever serving as an officer or director of a publicly traded company and agreed to pay a record $22 million fine, less than 5% of the compensation he received between 2000 and 2008. What did you think of the settlement with Countrywide?
I'd think a lot of it, if I were Angelo Mozillo, I'd think I did pretty well for myself. No jail, a relatively small fine compared to the hundreds of millions of dollars I was able to take out of this company.
Slap on the wrist.
Clearly a slap on the wrist. Mm-hmm. And part of the problem is the dual nature of how we prosecute these kinds of violations. We have the Department of Justice, which can put people in jail, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, which can't. And it's sort of like we have this two-headed monster. One head has some teeth, the other head has no teeth. And it was the head with no teeth that went after Angelo Mozillo. So the greatest danger he was in from the beginning was maybe he'd be gummed to death, but not even that happened.
3 months after the SEC settled the civil suit, federal prosecutors in Los Angeles dropped their criminal investigation of Countrywide and its CEO, Angelo Mozillo. We wanted to know why the Justice Department has been unable to bring a single criminal case against Countrywide or any of the major Wall Street banks. And Lanny Brewer, the head of the criminal division at the Justice Department, agreed to talk to us. A year ago, in September of 2010, you told a congressional hearing that you seek to prosecute people who make materially false statements, people who told the investors one thing and did something different.
That's absolutely right, and we're doing exactly that.
We spoke to a woman at Countrywide who was the senior vice president for investigating fraud. Mm-hmm. And she said that the fraud inside Countrywide was systemic, that it was basically a way of doing business.
Well, it's hard for me to talk about a particular case. Of course, in the Countrywide case, Steve, as you know, a terrific office, U.S. Attorney's Office in Los Angeles, investigated that, interviewed many, many people, hundreds of people perhaps, and reviewed millions of documents.
They never talked to the senior vice president inside Countrywide who was charged with investigating fraud.
Well, I can't speak about that because I actually don't know about that particular case. But if the senior vice president of any company believes they know about fraud, I want them to contact us.
Brewer says the department has brought major financial prosecutions involving hedge funds, insider trading, Ponzi schemes, and a huge bank fraud case in Florida. But he acknowledged there have been no prosecutions against major players in the financial crisis.
In our criminal justice system, we have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you intended to commit a fraud. But when you can't, or when we think we can't, there's still many, many important resolutions and options we have. And that's why there have been civil lawsuits and regulatory action.
Do you lack confidence in bringing cases under Sarbanes-Oxley?
Steve, no one really has accused this Department of Justice or this division or me of lacking confidence. If you look at the prosecutors all over the country, they are bringing record cases with respect to all kinds of criminal laws. Sarbanes-Oxley is a tool, but it's only one tool. We're confident, we follow the facts and the law wherever they take us, and we're bringing every case that we believe can be made.
Lanny Brewer says this Justice Department has been as aggressive as any in history. But a recent report on federal prosecutions from a research center at Syracuse University says the number of cases brought against financial institutions for fraud is at a 20-year low. When we come back, we talk to a whistleblower who was inside Citigroup during the financial meltdown.